Well, we're back, and it's been a long time. I'll come to that at the end as to why I'm back in the UK earlier than expected. But today we're looking at the olive harvest in the Languedoc region, the processing of the olives, both for table olives, for eating, obviously, and the olive oil process. It's an incredible process, been going on for centuries, and I think it'll give you a really good look into how that's done. We've got the chocolate digest. God, these have got small. Another thing that shrunk. We got the chocolate digestives and a nice cup of coffee, and we're ready to go. We're going to be looking at the quality end of the olive market. I'm not talking about these plastic packets you get in the supermarket, tinned olives, processed olives, that sort of thing. What I'm looking at is the really good artisan quality produced olives and olive oil. Specifically, we're looking at the Languedoc region. And near me, there's an amazing organisation called Languedoc in Cabazac, which is near Bise Minervois. They were very kind to show me round. They were incredibly helpful. They really wanted to show me everything. It's an amazing place. They produce table olives. They produce really fantastic, I mean, world top quality olive oil. Amazing shop. They do tours. I went on one of the tours to gather some of this information. It's a cooperative, so just like the grape harvest, all the olive farmers go to the cooperative and have their olives processed at the cooperative. So generally it goes through in batches. They process one farmer's lot and then the next. I guess somehow they also purchased olives in bulk from the farmers. We're talking a big amount of olives here. This year, just like the grape harvest, the olive crop was difficult. It was very dry. A lot of the olives are quite small, and just like the wine production, each year is a little bit unique, has a slightly different flavour, slightly different taste, and so they have to deal with that. And that's one of the things you're getting with artisan products. You're not getting that homogenized exactly the same every year. Every pot is the same. Again, just like the wine, olive oil is blended. There are professional tasters who have a very fine palate, can taste those subtle nuances in the oil. I can't, too old, palate's knackered. I know what I like and what I don't like, a bit like my wine really. But the people who are in the know really know their stuff. The interesting thing about olive processing was it had a lot of similarities with honey production, with the extraction and jarring of honey. So it was based on temperature, how you clean everything first, how it's stored, how it's blended, bottled or jarred. Very, very similar, a lot of similarities. We'll come on to those. It's tempting to think of just the table olives we eat and the olive oil that we use for cooking and for food. But there's so much more. There's a lot of cosmetic products, soaps. We have olive wood, some beautiful olive wood products. And the byproducts from the olive production go back into the land. They make logs for burning, products for burning, fertilizers that can go back onto the land from the byproducts. And so there's a whole lot more than the initial bit we just see. It's a bit, again, like the honey process. We've got the beeswax production, the propolis and the like. There's more than you expect from this process. Let's have a quick look at the olive year. Again, just like the grapes, there's a full year in the cycle, and there's a number of problems that the olive farmers face, like this year, not enough water. And so let's have a quick look through that process. They say that when you plant an olive tree, you plant it for your children. They're a slow-growing tree. You don't just plant an olive grove and a couple of years later start farming olives from them. Generally, you're looking at decades before planted olives actually start to produce proper quality olives. The season starts in May with the flowering of the olives. and that's a white flower. It's wind pollinated. Some types of olives require a male and female tree. Others will pollinate from other trees. It's a complex process, but generally they're wind pollinated. May is beautiful because you see all these plantations with these amazing white flowers. It's a little bit like the apple blossom. During the year, as the olives are growing, farmers are obviously having to look out for illnesses in the olives. And this is, again, a bit like beekeeping. This is a constant battle against new diseases and new problems that work their way across the countries through the olive plantation. There's a la fumagine, which is like a black mildew. It's not just olives get this. I've had plants in the garden. They get a sort of black sooty mildew on them. And that's something the olive farmers have to constantly monitor. They treat that with copper sulfate. There's a number of ways they can treat it, but they need to be on it. They can't just leave the tree and it will carry on. They need to be monitoring it all the time. Then there's l'oreille de paon, which is peacock's eye, which is a sort of pattern that makes a sort of peacock eye pattern in the leaf, which is a similar thing, needs to be treated, is normally treated with chemicals, but again needs to be treated. If you just leave it, you're going to lose your crop. And finally, there's the olive fly, a tiny fly, so tiny you can hardly see it. That attacks the olive and lives down in the roots of the tree. There's a ways that they can solve this. There's netting, which costs an absolute fortune because it has to be incredibly fine because this fly is so tiny. But one of the other ways that they treat it is by spraying a sort of clay type mixture onto the olives as a mist, which then coats the olive trees in this strange white powder, which masks the pheromone that the fly uses to detect the olives. Again, it's a constant battle. Again, they can put up pheromone traps for these flies, but they have to be on it all the time. And this is a newer problem. This is something that's coming through in the last few years that's now starting to affect. And when they solve that, another one will come along. It's just like the bees and just like the wine crops, the grape crops, grape harvest. So having monitored all these diseases and looked after their trees during the growing period, the next problem is whether they irrigate them or not. Some farmers don't irrigate them. Olive trees have incredibly deep roots, but if they have an incredibly dry season like this summer, then they may need to irrigate them. So then there's the cost and the work of setting up irrigation for the crops. There's some dates I'm going to give you here, some seasons, but actually they're moving forward all the time. And in fact, that's one of the reasons I missed the actual harvest. I was due to go and pick olives with one of the local farmers, and I missed it by a day. The day I turned up to help him, he said, actually, we've just finished. And that's because the season is moving forward all the time at the moment. But generally speaking, table olives get picked first. They're hand-picked, we'll come on to that. But they're typically September, October, and as I say, that's moving forwards. The oil for the olives, which is kind of the remainder that get left on the tree, tend to be November and even into December, and generally then picked in a different way. Again, we'll come on to the picking, and they're towards the end of the season, incredibly into December. And then there's the question of whether they're green or black olives. They're not a different olive. It's literally just the time that they're picked on the tree. A lot of the olive specialists consider the green olive to be a watery, not complete fruit, and the black olive to be a real olive. Personally, I'm not a great fan of the black olives. I like a green olive, and that's probably just because I'm unrefined and uncouth. The table olives are picked by hand. It's a laborious and hard process. They have a bowl on a loop round their neck. They literally hand pick them off the tree based on size, based on the quality of them. They hand pick. It's hard work, and a good olive picker will pick 75 kilos of olives a day. They start at the top of the tree because the olives at the top of the tree ripen first and work their way down through the tree using step ladders and literally just picking by hand and carefully, because they can't bruise the olives, very carefully placing them in the tray around their neck. The olives that are used for the oil production, not quite so important that they're not bruised, and generally they're shaken off the tree. In the more mass-produced olives, they use a device on the back of a tractor that sort of clamps around the bottom of the tree and just shakes the crap out the tree. All the olives fall down and they've put a net down on the floor to catch them. The smaller more artisan producers tend to use what looks like a strimmer with these plastic fingers on the end that kind of grip the branch and shake it. In the old days they used like a rake to scrape the olives, to knock the olives off the branch, and again all down into a net at the bottom of the tree where they'd gather them up. Obviously the oil producing olives, because they've been shaken off the tree, come down with a lot more leaves, branches, bits, and obviously then need a little bit more sorting when they're processed, but we'll come on to that. Let's have a look at the processing, because that's really the bit we're going to be showing you here, which is a really interesting stage. The first stage of any processing is to collect in the olives. They normally come in large trays from the farmers. So I see the farmer going through the village with his pickup stacked up with plastic trays of green olives, and they head off down to the cooperative, and at the cooperative the first stage is the washing and cleaning. Obviously whatever you do with the olives, you don't want pieces of grit, you don't want twigs, you don't want leaves, and what they do is they go through a washing process and an extraction, again very similar to the grapes, where all the leaves are taken out. The leaves go to make tea, olive tea, which apparently is very good for high blood pressure. I've never tried it. I need to get hold of some and try it. The table olives then go through a process in brine, and it's typically only a few days. If you take an olive off the tree and eat it, it is disgusting. It is so sharp and it has a most hideous strong taste. So they're soaked in brine, and the brine takes that bitterness and strong flavour out of the olives, and they're then stored in brine, and that's why table olives, artisan table olives, tend to be of that very salty nature. They've been soaking in brine typically 2 to 3 days. I always thought it was much longer than that, but it is 2 to 3 days. You can then buy fresh or pasteurised olives. The fresh ones obviously you keep in the fridge, and the pasteurised ones, once you've opened them, they tend to last quite a while. Compared to the table olive production, the oil production is much more complex, and we'll spend a bit of time on that, and I've got some nice video of that which Olibo were very kind to share. As with all the olive processing, the first stage is washing, cleaning out the leaves, the bits and everything else. The olives are then milled with the pip, so they keep the pip inside the olive and it's milled with the pip. In the old days this was a huge stone wheel driven either by a horse, a donkey, or even by a person just walking round and round with these great big millstones crushing up the olives. And incredibly, Olibo actually still have such a machine. It's driven by an electric motor now, but it is still the traditional stone mill wheel going round and round, and some of the farmers and some of their production is done in that way still, because it's seen as a more artisan way of producing the oil. The modern milling machine is a much more small and efficient process, doesn't weigh so much. They're referred to as hammers, and they do effectively the same thing as the millstone. They do it more efficiently in a smaller machine. I don't know that it's more reliable, because I don't know that the millstone can't get much more reliable than a bloody great stone turning round inside a bowl. But anyway, they do it now with a modern electrical machine, which is called a hammer, which does effectively the same, and it pulps up the olive and the pip. It's important to remember the pip is inside there too. This pulp then gets mixed. It gets mixed in a certain way to try and get the oils and everything to actually join up. It makes a tapenade effectively. Again, remember this is the olive and the pip, and it goes through the machine as a sort of pulp. The tapenade or pulp goes on to a machine which extracts the liquid from that pulp and leaves the solids behind. The solids go on to other processes, for example, like fertilizer, organic fertilizer, or being compacted down into like a log that can be burnt. The liquid, which is then a combination of olive oil and water, goes on to the further processing for the oil. Finally, the liquid that's come out from the pulp is a combination of water and oil, and that goes through a centrifuge, and of course the oil is lighter, so the oil goes up, comes out the top of the centrifuge, and the water goes down, comes out the bottom of the centrifuge, and that extracts it. It then goes on to further filtering, so they can filter it to any degree. You can have lightly filtered and it's a cloudy olive oil, and I've actually started to find I prefer that to the very heavily filtered olive oils. So you get this cloudy olive oil, and they can then go through another filter process which takes it down to that clear golden oil that we kind of associate with olive oil. And finally goes into these huge storage vats, again very similar to the wine production, to the grape processing, not as large obviously, but these huge vats of olive oil where it can then be blended and further processed. So if it's lightly filtered or unfiltered, it can then be filtered and moved on for whatever the demand is at the time, or blended and bottled from there. I'm going to put some links into Olibo because they were so incredibly friendly and helpful, and if you're ever in the region, please go and see them. I was really impressed. Interestingly, Olibo is the Catalonian for olive, something I learnt while I was there thanks to their excellent guide. Olibo itself has been built up over generations, and you can see that. You can see where they've extended, and it's now quite an elaborate setup and very, very impressive. The cooperative, again, just like the wine, tends to be the centre of the community. It's where all the farmers go and meet. They all know each other. It becomes a bit of a centre of the community. And again, just like the wine, you'd be surprised quite how much of an industry this is for the area. You know, this is the livelihood of quite a lot of people in the area. So by buying this very good quality oil from a local cooperative, you are supporting local farmers rather than some large international or global organisation with a large automated processing plant. And of course, the oil you're going to get from these artisans is far better than that homogenized product you'll get from an industry. Along with the processing plant, they have an amazing shop. It's an amazing shop. I'll pop some videos in. Obviously you've got table olives, a huge variety of table olives, olive oil in various blends and in various stages of the processing, so raw, unfiltered, filtered, blended, etc. You can do an olive oil tour, which is where I got some of this footage from. Now I have to add, I did have to go back and get some more because I screwed it up, but that's another story. You can buy cosmetic products, soaps, olive-based soaps or olive oil-based soaps, and I personally like, I know it's a bit of a confession this, I personally like their cookware and crockery. I've bought some beautiful bowls and mugs from there. Oh my god, I might be gay. No, I don't think I am. Finally, I'd like to thank Olibo for their help and their welcome. They were incredibly welcoming, incredibly helpful, and when I drive past now, I kind of look on them very fondly on the basis that they're a centre of the community, and that's a nice thing. I'd especially like to thank Naz. at the start of the recording, I think Naz thought she was going to become a film star. I did explain to her I'm an influencer of 3 people, and unfortunately, most of the video that we filmed with the 360, the Insta 360, came out appallingly bad. If you're interested in that, have a look at my Insta 360 video, because that kind of is a classic example of where the Insta 360 doesn't always work, and it let me down big style on this. I had to go back the next day and actually record a lot of what I thought I had on an iPhone, and my Insta 360 really messed me about there. So Naz, I'm sorry, you gave me a wonderful tour, you gave me so much information on the olives, and you never made it into the final video because my Insta 360 let me down. So we did record one bit, and here it is. So I'm here and I'm going to thank Naz for showing us around, and if you fancy coming and seeing this for yourself, I'm sure she'd make you very welcome. And yeah, thank you very much for your tour and your knowledge of all the olives.
Thank you so much for your attention.
That's great, thank you. So what's next from here? Well, you may have wondered why I'm home early from France. Turns out my main customer that I was working for couldn't help themselves, fell over their own feet with the ordering of the next stage of the contract, messed up catastrophically. I mean, only a local government can trip over their own feet in the way that they did, and that means that I'm effectively now an unemployed bum. Now, I was talking about going semi-retired, and this has been a perfect chance to sort of nudge me into that. So we may well be looking at the semi-retirement options and what you can and can't do. I mean, there's issues with it. Obviously, I'm not going to be bringing in as much money, but oh my God, I have loved having some time off. I normally work, you know, the full 100% of my working week, and to have 2 or 3 weeks off where I've just been able to do what I want to do has been lovely, but somehow I've got to fund that. So perhaps the next video will be about that. I also want to look into the cheap Chinese, I call it the cheap Chinese shit market, where you buy something from China and yes, you think it's a fantastic price and it turns out to be appalling quality, but there are some things that you buy very, very cheaply that are fantastic. And there's a lot of tricks with this Chinese market, and I've had quite a bit of experience in it now, buying quite decent sized woodworking equipment, diesel heaters for my van and my workshop in France during the winter, and I kind of feel I've got some knowledge of that market, which I think would be worth looking at. So it's going to be something like that, and I hopefully will see you then. And please, usual thing, if you like this, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge difference to us. We'll see you next time. Excuse me while I get earwax out my ear. Still got problems with that ear. Oh, and yet again this piece of shit's not working. It's an oh fucking hell, I screwed it up already. I might have finally got that out. Right, let's edit.